Title: What They Say About Black Men Is True. I Had to Find Out Myself, A True Infidelity Story, Part 1. The whisper that started it, all they say curiosity can ruin even the strongest heart. For Claire Thompson, a 34-year-old marketing executive from Chicago, that curiosity began with a whisper among her friends over wine one night. Black men, her best friend Sophie had said, half laughing, half serious, they just have something different about them. The way they look at you, the way they talk, it's like they see through you. Claire had laughed then, brushing it off. She was married to David, a kind, quiet architect she had known since college. Their life was comfortable, steady, predictable, and maybe a little too quiet. But something about Sophie's words lingered in her mind like an echo she couldn't turn off. Weeks later, during a business conference in Atlanta, that echo turned into temptation. Claire met Marcus Reed, a tall, confident man who worked in public relations. He had an effortless, charm-warm smile, deep laugh, and a voice that seemed to melt through every conversation. From their first handshake, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years, seen. He noticed things David no longer did. "You seem tired," Marcus said one afternoon. "You should smile more. You've got that kind of smile people don't forget." It wasn't love. Not yet. It was attention, gentle, flattering, and dangerous. And as much as Claire wanted to ignore it, part of her didn't want to. When she returned to Chicago, she couldn't shake the feeling. She caught herself checking her phone more often, hoping to see his name. When his text finally came, "I can't stop thinking about you." Claire's heart raced, even though her mind whispered, "Don't." But curiosity was louder than caution. Part 2. The line between wrong and real, Claire told herself it was harmless. She and Marcus were just talking, but their conversations grew longer, deeper, filled with quiet honesty. Marcus told her about his past, his struggles growing up, his dreams of starting his own company, the loneliness he sometimes felt behind his confident smile. Claire found herself admiring his strength, his warmth, the way he saw life as something to be lived, not just endured. At home, David noticed her distance. He asked if everything was okay. She said yes, but guilt had started to weigh on her. Still, every time Marcus called, she answered. One weekend, she told David she needed to visit a client in Atlanta again. He kissed her goodbye without a second thought. She drove to meet Marcus, her hands trembling on the wheel. When she saw him waiting in that quiet cafe, her breath caught. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. They talked for hours about dreams, regrets, and what it meant to feel alive again. Marcus never made a move, never crossed a line. Yet sitting across from him, Claire realized she had already crossed one in her heart. When she finally left, he simply said, "You deserve to feel seen, Claire. Just don't lose yourself trying to find that." His words stayed with her all the way back home. That night, as she lay beside her husband, tears filled her eyes. She wasn't sure if they came from guilt or longing or both. Part 3. The truth about what she learned a month passed before Claire heard from Marcus again. By then, she had pulled back, trying to rebuild what she had almost broken. David noticed her effort, small gestures, soft words, quiet dinners together, but something inside her had changed. One afternoon, Marcus sent a simple message, "Hope you're doing okay." She typed and deleted her reply 3 times before finally writing, "I'm learning to be." He never replied, and she never expected him to. Months later, as she walked through the park near her home, she saw a couple laughing together. The woman leaned into the man's arm the same way she once had with David. That image reminded her what she had been chasing along, a feeling, not a person. Claire realized that what they say about black men, or any man, really isn't about mystery or magic. It's about connection. Marcus had simply reminded her of something she had forgotten, that being seen starts with seeing yourself first. That night, Claire sat with David and finally told him everything, not every detail, but the truth about her loneliness, her doubts, her mistakes. He didn't yell. He didn't walk away. He just sat there, quiet and hurt, but listening. It wasn't forgiveness yet. But it was a beginning, and as the city lights flickered outside their window, Claire finally understood what people say about others might hold some truth. But what we find in ourselves, that's what changes everything. End of story. Tone summary. This story explores emotional infidelity, longing, and rediscovery without any explicit or inappropriate material. It's mature, emotional, and clean perfectly within YouTube. Monetization policies for storytelling content aimed at adults in the US and Canada. Would you like me to give you 5? YouTube optimized titles and thumbnail text ideas for this story next. Part 2. The line between wrong and real expanded after returning from Atlanta. Claire tried to focus on work and routine, hoping the strange pull she felt toward Marcus would fade. But it didn't. His presence lingered in her mind like a quiet song she couldn't stop humming. Days passed and she checked her phone constantly. When he finally texted again, just a simple, "How have you been?" her heart jumped. She tried to tell herself it was innocent, just a professional staying in touch. But deep inside, she knew that wasn't entirely true. Their messages grew frequent, natural, and somehow personal. They talked about their jobs, then about things beyond work dreams, disappointments, memories. Marcus had a way of asking questions that made Claire think. Questions no one else had asked her in years. "Are you happy?" He once texted. It was a simple question, but it hit her hard. She sat staring at her phone for a long time before replying. "I think I should be." At home, David noticed her being distracted. She smiled less, laughed less, and often stared out the window, lost in thought. He would ask, "Everything okay at work?" And she would nod, avoiding his eyes. Guilt started to creep in, but it wasn't enough to stop her from replying whenever Marcus texted. It wasn't about romance. Not yet. It was about being understood. Marcus often called her during his evening walks. They'd talk about life, about how people change with time. He shared stories from his past, how he'd been raised by a single mother, how he'd learned to stay grounded, how he tried to find beauty in small things. Claire listened with quiet admiration. He spoke with sincerity, never trying to impress her, never crossing any lines. But every word drew her closer. One night after a long phone call, Claire stood by her bedroom window while David slept. She looked out at the city lights and whispered to herself, "What am I doing?" She knew she hadn't done anything wrong yet, but emotionally, she was already somewhere else. She felt like she was living two lives, one built on comfort and routine, and another filled with emotion and connection. A few weeks later, her company announced another client event in Atlanta. The moment she saw the location, her heart raced. Marcus lived there. She told herself it was just work, but part of her wanted to see him again. When she mentioned the trip to David, he didn't suspect anything. "Be safe," he said, giving her a kiss on the forehead. That small gesture broke her heart a little. But she packed her bags anyway. When her plane landed, she hesitated before texting Marcus. But before she could, his message appeared. "Heard you're coming back to my city. Coffee." She stared at it for a full minute before replying, "Maybe." They met at a quiet cafe downtown. The moment Claire saw him again, every emotion she'd been holding back came rushing in. He looked the same, calm, confident, and warm, but this time, the energy between them was different. There was comfort, but also tension. Marcus smiled. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I," she admitted. They sat for hours, talking like old friends. The conversation flowed easily. They shared stories about childhood, ambitions, regrets. Claire found herself laughing freely, something she hadn't done in months. At one point, Marcus looked at her and said softly, "You seem lighter today." She smiled, but said nothing. Inside, she was anything but light. She was torn. When the cafe started to empty, neither of them wanted to leave. Marcus walked her to her car. The air was cool, and the city lights reflected softly off the pavement. He didn't try to touch her or say anything out of line. He just looked at her and said, "You deserve to feel seen, Claire. Don't lose yourself trying to hold everything together." His words hit her deeply. It wasn't a confession, but it was something real, something honest. Claire wanted to say something back, but all she managed was, You make things sound so simple. He smiled. They usually are. We're the ones who make them complicated. She got in her car, but before driving away, she looked in the mirror and saw him still standing there watching her leave. For the rest of the drive, her heart raced. She knew what she felt wasn't right, yet she couldn't deny it. It wasn't about attraction alone. It was about being seen, truly seen, after years of feeling invisible. Back home, she tried to settle back into her routine, but things felt different now. Every time David spoke, she found herself comparing his quiet calm to Marcus's warmth. David wasn't unkind, he just didn't see the cracks that had formed in their marriage. He assumed everything was fine because Claire never said otherwise. One night, while folding laundry, David asked, "You been somewhere else lately? Did something happen at work?" His tone was gentle but concerned. She froze for a moment, then smiled and said, "Just tired. That's all." It was the easiest lie she'd ever told, and the one that hurt the most. She wanted to be honest. But how could she explain something she didn't fully understand herself? She wasn't in love with Marcus, but she was connected to him. He made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt for years. And that made everything complicated. The messages between them slowed down after that. Maybe they both sensed it was dangerous to keep going. But even in silence, Claire thought about him often. When her phone buzzed, her heart still skipped, hoping it was him. Sometimes she'd scroll through their old messages, smiling and feeling guilty all at once. One evening, Marcus called unexpectedly. His voice was calm as always. "Just checking in," he said. "How are things?" Claire didn't know what to say. She wanted to tell him everything that she missed their talks, that she thought about him every day, but she simply said, "I'm okay." He paused before replying. "Good, stay that way." It was the last time they spoke for weeks. The silence hurt more than she expected. She missed his voice, his calm presence. But she also realized that she had reached a crossroads. If she kept going down that path, she might lose everything she'd built with David. One Sunday afternoon, while cooking dinner, Claire looked across the table at her husband. He was talking about a new project at work, his eyes lighting up the way they used to when they first met. For the first time in a long while, she noticed the small things again, the kindness in his voice, the steadiness in his presence, the loyalty that had never once wavered. That night, she deleted Marcus's number. It wasn't out of anger or guilt, it was out of understanding. He had reminded her of what she was missing, but he had also reminded her of what she still had. Still, as she lay in bed beside David, her mind wandered back to that quiet cafe in Atlanta, to Marcus's words. "Don't lose yourself trying to hold everything together." She didn't know if she was holding her life together or letting it go, piece by piece. What she did know was that she had crossed a line not in action, but in her heart. And once a line is crossed, things never feel quite the same again. Part 3, the truth about what she learned, expanded months past since that last quiet moment between Claire and Marcus. The world didn't stop turning, emails still came, deadlines still pressed. Dinner still had to be cooked, but something inside Claire had shifted. She had stepped back from the edge, but the echo of what almost happened still lived in her thoughts. Some mornings she'd wake up and feel a strange ache in her chest, the kind that comes from both regret and longing. But she had made a decision to fix what she could before she lost everything. David noticed the difference. He didn't ask questions, but he watched her quietly, sensing something had changed. Claire started putting effort back into her marriage, not out of guilt, but out of realization. She began leaving little notes for him again, cooked his favorite meals, and asked about his projects. It wasn't instant or magical. It was awkward at first, even forced. But she was trying, and David could feel that. He started responding, helping her in the kitchen, joining her for evening walks, and making small jokes again. Still, there were nights when Claire couldn't sleep. She would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what Marcus was doing. Did he ever think of her? Did he ever miss their talks? She'd scroll through her phone, tempted to message him, but she never did. She knew that one small hello could pull her right back into that world she had fought to leave behind. One afternoon, As she sat in a park near her office, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. His message was simple. "Hope you're doing okay?" For a long time, she just stared at it. Her heart jumped the same way it always did when she saw his name. She typed out 3 drafts before sending one. "I'm learning to be." Then she locked her phone and put it away. That was all she said, and that was all he needed to hear. He never replied, and she didn't expect him to. Something about that silence felt right like the end of a chapter that had already said everything it needed to. Over time, Claire found herself becoming more present at home. She started talking to David honestly, not about Marcus, but about how she felt disconnected, how she wanted to feel close again. To her surprise, David didn't get defensive. He listened. He told her he had felt it too, that somewhere along the way they had both stopped reaching for each other. That moment to people finally speaking the truth became the start of healing. They began doing small things that once came naturally. Weekend coffee runs, movie nights, even short trips outside the city. They weren't the same people they used to be, but they were learning each other again. Claire found that the more honest she became, the lighter she felt. The guilt slowly faded, replaced by quiet gratitude. Still, sometimes memories of Marcus would surface not in a painful way, but as gentle reminders. His kindness, his honesty, his words, "Don't lose yourself trying to hold everything together," had stayed with her. He had come into her life when she needed a mirror, not a man. Through him, she had seen her own emptiness and realized how far she had drifted from herself. That was the real connection, not attraction, but awakening. One evening, Claire took a walk alone after work. The city lights glowed softly and autumn leaves covered the path. She stopped by a bench and watched couples pass by, laughing, talking, holding hands. For a moment, she saw her younger self, bright, hopeful, unguarded, then smiled. She realized she had been chasing a feeling that wasn't about Marcus at all. It was about wanting to feel alive again. He had just been the reminder that she was capable of more than existing. When she got home, David was in the kitchen cooking dinner. She stood there quietly for a moment, watching him. He looked up and smiled. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, walked over, and hugged him tightly. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace, not because everything was perfect, but because she finally understood herself. Weeks turned into months, and life settled into something balanced. Claire didn't try to erase the past. She accepted it. It had been messy, emotional, and complicated, but it had taught her something no comfortable routine ever could. Love wasn't just about loyalty, it was about presence. And being seen wasn't about who looked at you, but who truly knew you. One day, while cleaning her inbox, she found their old emails, the first "Hope you made it home safe," the jokes, the long conversations. For a moment, she considered deleting them, but she didn't. Instead, she smiled softly and archived them. They were part of her story, not something to hide, but something to learn from. Later that evening, she sat on the porch with David, sipping tea as the sun set. They talked about small things, neighbors, work, plans for the weekend. But underneath that calm conversation was a quiet strength, a shared understanding that they had survived something fragile. They didn't talk about what had happened in the months before. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy, was peaceful as the sky turned golden. Claire thought about the things people say about love, temptation, men, women, happiness. People say a lot, she realized, but truth is never simple. What they say about Black men, about attraction, about temptation, it wasn't about any of that. It was about how easily the heart can wander when it stops feeling seen, how human it is to want connection, and how strong it is to find your way back before losing everything. Marcus had been a chapter, not the story. Her real story was still being written with David. With honesty, with choice. That night, as she lay in bed beside her husband, she reached out and took his hand. He squeezed it softly, half asleep, but she felt the warmth in his touch. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet thank you to life. 2 lessons, 2 moments that change you without breaking you in the end. Claire learned that curiosity can open dangerous doors, but it can also open your eyes. She had been close to losing her marriage, but she had found herself instead. And sometimes that's what life does, breaks your rhythm to remind you what matters. The next morning, Claire woke early, made breakfast, and watched the sunrise. The world outside looked new, though nothing had changed. Maybe it was her perspective that had shifted. She smiled, knowing she couldn't rewrite the past. But she could choose what came next. Love, she realized, isn't about perfection, it's about patience. And being seen isn't about someone new noticing you. It's about learning to notice yourself again. And in that quiet moment, as the city came alive, Claire finally felt what she had been searching for all along, not passion, not escape, but peace.